Gone, but not forgotten. The planet Lennon, also known as Drogradur NO425, was once the capital of the Galactic Hub, a robust player community in the game No Man's Sky. The messages here mark the convergence of abandonment and heritage tourism. One civilization departed, leaving behind these messages in bottles for future visitors to read. But why was Lennon and the other planets in the Galactic Hub abandoned? What else did they leave behind for the archaeologists to interpret? On August 11th, 2017, Hello Games, creator of No Man's Sky, deployed the Atlas Rises update, version 1.3, creating a universe-wide climate change event affecting each of the quintillion worlds within the game. Players on Paradise-class planets awoke to wastelands, toxic atmospheres, and extreme temperatures. No longer able to survive, hundreds of Galactic Hub citizens abandoned their farms and bases, relocating to a new home in the stars. It was the first mass human migration from one place to another within the same digital environment, a migration caused by a software-induced natural disaster. Those bases are now disaster ruins. They stand as evidence of past human occupation, players who settled together to explore a lush patch of star systems, creating a utopian community of citizen scientists. The abandoned structures also serve as a reminder of the catastrophic changes wrought upon players by the Atlas Rises update, an act of God, or in this case, of Hello Games. When No Man's Sky first launched in the summer of 2016, a multidisciplinary team of archaeologists launched with it as the No Man's Sky Archaeological Survey. Intent on studying the settlement of the game's procedurally generated universe, which included the potential for machine-created culture, the mechanics of the game proved unworkable for any meaningful archaeological investigation, and the project died quietly over the next few months. However, after reports surfaced about the Galactic Hub's exodus, the Legacy Hub Archaeological Project picked up where the survey left off, this time investigating abandoned human settlements in order to learn more about the Hub and its citizens, and how people interact with the changing landscape of a living digital environment. The project began on the Hub's old homeworld, Lennon, settled by the Hub's founder, Syn1334. Once a paradise planet of red grasslands, it is now a world of extreme cold, ice, and snowy mountains. None of the original player bases remain, and the only physical evidence of past settlement are dozens of communication stations. Did players use these to say goodbye and to leave a forwarding address? The answer was not what I expected. Before cataloging the contents of messages, I mapped their locations relative to the portal, which served as a key, fixed point of entry to Lennon. I also created a new kind of map in order to indicate locations of communication stations and other features farther afield. In No Man's Sky, it's difficult to ascertain absolute distances between objects on a planet. The game does provide information on how long it will take to travel on foot at a walking pace. With the introduction of a compass to the game in an earlier version, one can now map time and distance relative to a fixed point. For every site going forward, I created a time map to indicate positions of bases, comm stations, and other points of interest. I cataloged over 60 comm stations at the end of April 2018, plus an additional dozen far away from Lennon's portal. These remote stations seemed to be largely from original settlers, and they marked places such as trading posts and shelters, which disappeared after the Atlas Rises update. They indicate the placement of old bases, also gone. The portal, however, tells a different story. Players can access any portal on any planet through a series of 16 glyphs, which are input into a portal's terminal. This enables fast travel over galactic distances, and provides an easy opportunity for anyone to visit the Hub's old capital planet, or anyone else in the game. On August 19, 2017, the Hub held a portal party on Lennon to bid farewell. Portal parties are common in No Man's Sky and encourage players to show up at the same place at the same time in order to create communication stations and socialize. The massive number of comm stations at the Lennon portal largely reflect what players created at this farewell party. But intermingled are other messages from heritage tourists, those people whom have visited Lennon since its abandonment. In May, Hello Games announced it would release another major update on July 24, 2018, called Next. Based on what happened to the Galactic Hub with Atlas Rises, that meant I had 3 months to document as many abandoned settlements as possible in the Legacy Hub before they potentially disappeared. Through using the Hub's wiki and from communication initiated by the Hub's founder and his colleague in charge of HUB Heritage, I was able to put together a list of Legacy Hub settlements that were of historic importance to the group by way of history and personalities. Some bases were notable because they were the earliest in the hub, and others were historic because of their ties to various warring factions, creating in-game lore that later became canon thanks to Hello Games' adoption of it. I needed a place to start, so I navigated to the homeworld of the hub's founder to visit his abandoned base and the Cave of Forgotten Dreams nearby. That's when things got strange, and the strangest did not abate for the rest of the project. Syn1334 settled peaceful Pepper Dusk in 2016, building a base with a hydroponic farm inside. Hub members are encouraged to share, and Syn1334 led by example. Once he founded the hub, citizens began traveling to his homeworld to leave messages either around his base or in the nearby Cave of Forgotten Dreams, a high, deep cavern containing dozens of communication stations. Upon my arrival in Pepper Dusk's system via warp, I scanned it with my starship and then flew to the base icon showing in my head-up display. Upon arrival, however, the mesa atop which the base was supposed to be was empty, although the nearby cave remained full of messages to read, Dead Sea Scrolls on a now-dead planet. After setting up my recording gear, I conducted a remote sensing exercise with the in-helmet visor provided by the game, and this revealed a circle of purple icons indicating valuable plant resources, but the scanner showed that they were deep underground, surrounding the base's icon. It appeared as if the Atlas Rises update not only changed the climate on every planet in the universe, but it also changed the topography. As future visits to other Galactic Hub sites would show, mountains replaced plains, burying bases and communication stations. Valleys replaced hills, leaving human-created structures hanging in the air out of reach. Lakes evaporated, and craters filled with water. I had not expected that I would conduct actual excavations within these digital worlds. I logged back into the game the next morning only to find that the base icon had moved to the opposite side of the planet. In its place above ground stood a generic base unit indicating an unclaimed homestead site. Remote sensing showed no underground plants. I flew to the base's new location and found it completely excavated and above ground, as if it had just been built. I was both relieved and mortified. The base was saved, but was now removed from its original context. I wrote to the hub's leadership to explain what had happened, but they were not concerned. Similar events had already happened to them in their explorations of the old hub after Atlas Rises. Because this was my first base, I began establishing a method for surveying and recording data, using the PlayStation 4's own screen and video capture tools for flyovers and walkthroughs. I would later publish these online for the hub community, and would compare what existed now to archival images of bases and landscapes from a time before the catastrophe. I also kept a paper notebook for mapping and drawing, and began developing a reporting template to keep track of the planet's current environment, along with a written description of what I found. As I was treating these site visits as salvage projects, it was important to record everything I could in the event these would disappear in future updates. Finished with the base, I returned to the cave and recorded the messages I found there. I was able to record location, color of the comm stations, messages, and the gamer tags of who placed them, so I could begin tracking various players throughout the hub to learn who the explorers were. Many of the messages contained dates, and I was able to determine when the majority of messages were left, and the Dark Age afterwards, prior to Heritage tourist visits several months later. I also learned how to excavate in No Man's Sky, using the game's terrain manipulator tool to dig. The surface of planets in No Man's Sky has no real stratigraphy outside of overburden and bedrock, and it's impossible to destroy buried bases and comm stations with the manipulator's beam. My excavation technique improved over time as I got a feel for the tool and its capabilities in digging digital surfaces. What follows is a visual catalog of the abandoned Legacy Hub bases I documented, and I've provided added commentary when needed to explain some of the strange things that I found. The game itself is a landscape, and my interaction with it had some unintended consequences. These sites are fragile and should be explored with caution. Abundance HQ is the first example of a floating base, one that had once been built on solid ground, but now hovers over the landscape since the Atlas Rises update. One of two memorial bases I found, this ziggurat tomb was almost completely buried by the update and required manual excavation. After a system crash, the tomb excavated, relocated, and restored itself, and this site also provided a new kind of remote sensing technique, data noise. Whenever this game slowed down or the frame rate became choppy, it indicates submerged, data-rich features. Player Hollyworks was one of the hub's earliest settlers and created a pearl farm for anyone to use. Unlike other players who chose to abandon their bases, Holly disassembled hers and moved it to her new home, leaving behind a ring of suspended communication stations mentioning the pearl farm that is no longer there. The Bez Har concern is an embassy building partially embedded in a mountain. It stands now as a monument to the encroachment of the Empire of Hova and the Galactic Hub just prior to the Harsh Buds War of 2017, the major conflict between player factions in No Man's Sky. Another player built his own Pearl Farm elsewhere in the hub, but what really made this site interesting was how my own interaction with the space over the 3 site visits led to the game not showing me the base at all, and then showing me the base floating above the landscape, and finally repositioning the farm on the ground below. Comparing the base's appearance now with how it looked when it was originally constructed, there are pieces missing from the current base, making these true ruins. Other bases I documented later were also missing pieces from their original builds, but this was not always the case. The Longitude base on Elabor is another partially remembered legacy base in the Galactic Hub, and is one of the best examples of the use of traditional photogrammetry to compare the current iteration of the base to what it was when it was first constructed. The birdcage was the first base that I found on an exotic planet, this one completely tessellated. Originally placed on a spit of grassy land overlooking a sea, the base now occupies a clearing surrounded by rock arches and gold trees. Butterfur the King is one of the earliest and most prolific explorers and builders in the history of the Galactic Hub, leaving behind a string of bases as he traveled from system to system. He had built a temple to the sun on this world, but after the update, he destroyed it and built a more practical shelter as he prepared plans to reconstruct the temple in the new Galactic Hub, which marks the first instance of heritage reconstruction of digital architecture in No Man's Sky. Deliberately hidden from online forums, the location of the homeworld of what would become the Empire of Hova was kept secret in order to protect it from vandalism. Older versions of No Man's Sky permitted one base per system, and if a player had abandoned a base for another one, the original bases could be overwritten by other players. Such actions are considered to be acts of war. The original base remains, and a handful of nearby communication stations hint of the war to come. This hydroponic farm sits alone, unused, in a quiet corner of the Legacy Hub. What makes it unusual is that while other bases are surrounded by communication stations left by visiting players, there are none here in Mortham. The farm was built, but no one came. The base itself is unremarkable, but its planet is a toxic cluster of giant mushrooms and miasmic gas. The planet is also a throwback to the earliest version of the game, where procedurally generated structures densely populated planet surfaces. In this case, 3 bases are within a minute's walk from each other, something I'd never seen before. The planet Red Death used to be extremely hot and was host to one of the hub's most popular racetracks, where players could race against the clock to complete player-built courses on various land vehicles. All that remains now of the racetrack is the starting line and the communication stations noting the difficulty of the track. We again have inscriptional evidence of features now gone. Sanctuary lies in the outer reaches of the Legacy Hub, in what citizens called the Hubbarbs, more than 1 warp away from the capital planet. It is another example of a floating base, the farming platform connected to the base unit by a thin staircase. Archival photos of the original base show the domes resting on a floating dome of rock, which was repositioned in the update. The local Serenity system contains much of the hub's later lore, just prior to the Atlas Rises update. While few of the older bases remain, comm stations mark where the Empire of Hova and the Galactic Hub signed their peace treaty to end the Harsh Buds War, prompting the creation of the commemorative Olympic-style games with events scattered throughout the system. Binoscope's pad was the first outdoor, non-hydroponic farm that I'd found, with rows of crops half buried outside the base in cultivated rows. I was able to plow the furrows with the terrain manipulator, revealing cactus plants that could be harvested. All cultivated crops regenerate and are sustainable, and within hours, a new crop emerged while I excavated and documented the base nearby. In a unique confluence of procedural generation and human-created architecture, the Atlas Rises update positioned a trading post directly underneath the player's base, connecting the two. This reminded me of ancient Rome, and more modern cities, where people live in stories above the ground floor shops. This base provides players with raw materials to make glass, a highly valuable resource. Inscriptional evidence reveals the presence of the cold weather crop Corazagan, which is an older term for the crop as it is called now, frostwort. Because of the use of the older term, the base can then be correctly dated to the construction in the Pathfinder version 1.2 era. Up to this point, all of the bases that I documented feature something strange, some kind of anomaly or unusual behavior. Mother Base is strange because there is nothing wrong with it. Unremarkable in itself, the positioning of the base within the landscape made it the best candidate for me to attempt photogrammetry, filming the base from all sides and then exporting that data into a mesh for 3D printing. It is now possible to produce 3D models of digital-only settlements, which can be used for reconstruction should the bases be destroyed by future game updates. A typical hydroponic farm, what makes Panda's base stand out is the fact that a flying sentinel droid has been trapped inside for months. I don't know how the sentinel got in, but it remains within the farm's glass walls, unable to chase or shoot visiting players. Although the base is now 95% buried under a mountain, a glitch in the game allows players to land on an underground pad, passing directly through the rock and emerging under the landscape for a spectacular bottom-up view of the world above. Glitches like this are game artifacts and add additional complexity to the interaction of players and the gaming environment. I have not been the only person responsible for accidentally causing a base to relocate itself from one part of a planet to another. Someone did this with Meridian Village. The base currently rests on a flat spot of land an hour's walk away from its original location, which is indicated by a subterranean ring of exotic crops, as well as buried communication stations not unlike those found on Pepperdusk. Here we see evidence of previous exploration by another player after the Atlas Rises update. One of the few real-world encroachments of culture within No Man's Sky, Paddy's Paddock features a massive billboard containing an icon of a hitchhiker's thumb, which recalls Douglas Adams' classic, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Nearby, on the planet Onsen 4, a different player created a base in the shape of the Deep Thought computer, also from the book, with the answer to life, the universe, and everything shining from its display. Occasionally, the universal reset of Atlas Rises changed topography in the extreme, which is exactly what happened on the planet PR. Its base and communication stations were buried deep under the bedrock, unable to be excavated, although icons remain indicating the presence of the base and surrounding communication stations. Unlike the farm at Mortham, Serenity Villa was built on speculation and then advertised on the No Man's Sky player Reddit, inviting players to come and relax by the sea, take advantage of the farm, and explore in a paradise climate. The base is gone now, and the planet is now a frozen wasteland, but communication stations left by guests hint at the luxury that once was. The opposite of Plot King's base on planet PR, the Valhalla base was left floating high in the air by Atlas Rises, so high that it requires a starship to reach it. Most of the base remains inaccessible because of missing doors and hallways present in the original build. The base memorializes the old landscape, how the world used to appear before the update created this sky base. The final base in my catalog of Legacy Hub settlements is the heart of Sosashibuke. In its current state, what once was a tall tower is now half buried, sunk into the planet's high water table. The base is a true ruin, with parts missing, and its farmable crop of star bulbs floats tantalizingly in the air out of reach. On July 24th, 2018, No Man's Sky version 1.5, known as Next, reset the universe again. This time, citizens of the Galactic HUB were prepared. Many players had packed up their bases and awaited the update from the shelter of their starships. Upon waking, every planet had changed once again, with new climates and new landscapes. Over the next few weeks, the Galactic HUB moved yet again, a disaster migration, albeit one that was planned for this time. But what happened to the bases and communication stations of the Legacy Hub from before Atlas Rises? All of the bases are now gone, overwritten by 1.5. Many of the communication stations remain, however, although most are buried far underground out of reach. I returned to the original capital planet of Lennon, and the ring of comm stations remains, but is inaccessible. I returned to a few of the planets I documented earlier, but everything is gone, although some of the old worlds have been resettled by new players. All that remains are the data I collected during my investigation, which I've since shared with the Hub community as they work on creating a history of their civilization. As to what I learned, I found that traditional archaeological methods and tools continue to work in digital environments, although their usefulness depends largely on the mechanics provided by the game. I was able to create a new kind of map for documenting features in the landscape, and could use the PlayStation camera or my starship for drone photography. I could conduct remote sensing, and could excavate. and my research questions about human habitation and migration in a synthetic universe, as evidenced through physical remains, were not really all that different than if I were observing brick-and-mortar archaeology left behind from a natural disaster. Through my archaeological investigation of 35 player bases in the Legacy Hub, I was able to observe how people responded at first to their natural habitat that they had built for themselves and for others. And after the Atlas Rises update, I could see the resilience of a well-managed community of players, and how, with good leadership and resources, recovery from a natural disaster could be swift, with the resulting civilization prospering better than before. The outcome of the project was largely optimistic, especially when observing human behavior in No Man's Sky. When people are given free access to resources and room to live, and are free from competing for this space and resources, they live in peace and use their space and resources to create. They don't create alone, but gravitate towards one another to create and share together in a functional utopia. How players in the Galactic Hub choose to inhabit that space underscores the fundamental creative and exploratory nature of people, that when basic needs are met, humanity functions at its best.